Continuing from the previous part, the secrets of Steer were revealed. Returning to Ja-in and Lee Su, unaware that they were being targeted by the government, they went back to the laboratory to find a solution. They were welcomed by the state military outside the laboratory gates, as images of the two dangerous individuals were immediately reported to the intelligence bureau. The decision was made to arrest both Ja-in and Lee Su, leading to Ja-in's crazy. When both were unjustly detained, the military considered using force to suppress them. The situation almost escalated into a disaster, but thanks to Lee Su's intervention, it didn't go too far. As a true simp, Ja-in followed Lee Su's wishes, and thus both were arrested and separated. Lee Su, suspected of being infected, was taken to the government laboratory for confirmation. In contrast, Ja-in, after being handcuffed, was taken directly to meet Kim Seo-dong, the head of the Ministry of Defense. At the beginning of their conversation, Kim Seo-dong tried to remind Ja-in of her father, a former detective who disappeared while investigating a mysterious entity. However, Ja-in couldn't recall anything, and throughout the conversation, he only questioned where the military took Lee Su. Just as Seo-young was about to turn the tables, the messenger arrived with the news of Lee Su's positive test result, which Seo-young used to explain Ja-in's concerns about Lee Su. Seo-young also revealed that they found a way to deal with the virus, by identifying and killing those infected. Feeling something was off, Ja-in erupted in anger, breaking free from his restraints and questioning Seo-young's statements. In response, Seo-young argued that they had to do it to save the world. But for Ja-in, the whole world boiled down to just one girl. He promptly punched the bulletproof glass, intending to challenge Seo-young. A few more punches and the glass would have shattered, but Seo-young remained calm. From her pocket, Seo-young pulled out a photo from her father's old diary, asserting that despite her age, Ja-in hadn't changed much. Upon seeing the photo, especially the hand and the face of Seo-young's mother, Ja-in was suddenly struck by memories flooding back. From the day he was born to the moment, he uttered the words, "I love you, Mom." From the happiest times with his birth mother, to the darkest moments of his life, a sudden rush of emotions overwhelmed Ja-in, causing him to cry uncontrollably. From this point on, humanity's archenemy had officially returned. On another front, Seo-young sent a petition to the president, mainly focusing on Steer and its danger due to its rapid spread and ability to control humans. To ensure the safety of humanity, she proposed killing Lee Su, the host of the virus, to eliminate the potential threat, even though the president hesitated to kill a human to protect the nation and humanity. Sacrificing the minority to protect the majority became a priority, so after much deliberation, he approved the request of Defense Minister Kim Seo-young. Lee Su, unaware of the government's decision, finds herself in a precarious situation. In contrast, Ja-in, after regaining his memories, transforms into a powerful being with a completely different attitude. Remembering his mother's death, he sees killing the detective as mere revenge for her. Hearing this, Seo-young sarcastically remarks that Ja-in probably doesn't even remember his father's face and now only cares about national security. But Ja-in couldn't care less about Seo-young's thoughts, all he wants now is the photo. Ja-in threatens that if Seo-young hands over the photo, he won't kill her right then and there, regardless of the guns pointed at him. Seo-young remains stubborn. She asks what will happen if she doesn't cooperate. When Seo-young sees Ja-in punching through several walls with a single blow, her demeanor changes, realizing the danger. She knows that acting foolishly would be fatal, so she willingly hands over the photo to Ja-in. Before Ja-in leaves, Seo-young wonders if he's going to save Lee Su. However, Ja-in is different now. The death of a person means nothing to him because he has long intended to eradicate humans from the earth. Ja-in comfortably leaves amid the horror of the onlookers. Despite killing several people, no one dares to confront death in front of them. Upon hearing loud noises from Seo-young's room, her subordinate immediately rushes in out of concern for her safety. Although Seo-young doesn't suffer any injuries, witnessing Ja-in's power firsthand leaves her trembling with fear. Immediately, Seo-young orders her subordinates to raise the national security alert to the highest level. As for Lee Su, she suddenly faces execution, leaving her stunned. After being explained the reason, although difficult to accept, for the greater good of humanity, Lee Su reluctantly accepts her fate. Because of her cooperation, Lee Su will receive a peaceful death, like falling into a gentle sleep. However, there seems to be another side of Lee Su that doesn't quite agree with this outcome. Elsewhere, after a search, Donald finally finds Ja-in. She's worried about Lee Su because she couldn't contact her all night. Unfortunately, her friend is nowhere to be found, only tanks and guns aimed at her. Confused, Donald almost gets shot, but luckily, the author's son is beside her, keeping things under control. As for Lee Su, driven by the survival instinct with Steer inside her, she takes control of the researcher to find a way to survive. Despite her panic in this unexpected situation, she manages to maintain her composure. Speaking of panic, Donal is also in a state of panic. Just when things are peaceful, she suddenly faces gunfire amid the prospect of leaving Earth. Donal can only cry beside her friend Jain. For Jain, even though his intention remains to eradicate humanity, remembering the joyful moments with Donal and especially with Lee Soo fills him with remorse. Jain couldn't help but intervene to save his friend from the military. Despite tanks firing at the enemy, the result leaves them even more horrified. Jain doesn't even lose a hair while protecting his friend. Although Jain acknowledges that Lee Soo is nothing like his mother, he still wants to protect her. Amid the military's panic, Jain asks Donal if she wants to meet Lee Soo with him. Contrary to an emotionless Jain, Donal struggles to answer. In this situation, with death looming over them, Donal can only tremble, unable to speak. So Jain explains the situation, letting her know that the country's leaders want to kill him and Lee Soo to save others. Jain wants to know if Donal thinks this is justified. But Donal, already crying, can't comprehend what Jain is saying. She's just scared. Just as the author's son is pouring his heart out, the commander boldly orders a second round of gunfire, which is instantly stopped. Jain then grabs the commander's head, raising it to the horror of the others. For Jain, the notion of sacrificing the small for the greater good is laughable. To him, sacrificing should be his own choice, not someone else's dictate. Ultimately, it's the strong who decide, and this time Jain will determine the fate of humanity. With a gentle breeze, Jain effortlessly wipes out everything before Donal's terrified gaze. From above, reporters are trying to narrate the horrific battlefield caused by Jain's hand. The government-sent troops are elite forces specialized in handling extremely dangerous individuals. However, within a moment, they are all wiped out. This terrifies the reporters. They wonder what kind of monster Jain is to be so terrifying. Although the battle is far from over, the military keeps arriving like moths to a flame. Jain reflects that he's learned the language and thought process of humans, as well as about their world, only to realize that humans consider themselves the measure of all things. But is that true? All living creatures perish at the hands of humans in various ways, whether as food, decoration, or simply for amusement. Jain has experienced every aspect of existence. Despite becoming human, he still can't stand the arrogance of humanity, especially those pretentious reporters babbling around him. To avoid being bothered by pests, Jain coldly hurls a stone, causing a helicopter to explode. However, seeing the helicopter heading towards Donal, Jain's indifference disappears. Quickly, Jain appears before Donal again to save her, because even as a human, he has learned the compassion of humanity. The battlefield is chaotic, mirroring Jain's inner turmoil. Nonetheless, he will continue on the path he has chosen. However, seeing Donal crying in fear, Jain realizes he can't ignore loved ones. Now, instead of annihilating everything, he will withdraw and no longer care about anything. Instead, he will protect Lee Soo from the government's claws. Speaking of Lee Soo, after some psychological manipulation, she easily escapes from the government's lab with some people being controlled by Steer. Seeing the situation getting out of hand, the security staff resorted to Plan B, which was to deal with Lee Soo directly upon confrontation. Lee Soo, although unaware of why, senses the Steer cells in her body controlling innocent people to throw themselves into gunfire. As a human, Lee Soo can't let Steer wreak havoc. To prevent further bloodshed, Lee Soo quickly slams her head hard against the ground, breaking free from Steer's control. At this moment, a voice suddenly echoes in Lee Soo's mind, Steer. It wants Lee Soo to look closely at the reality before her. The people ahead are trying to kill her, but Steer, on the contrary, wants to save her. So, it truly doesn't understand why Lee Soo is trying to stop it. Steer explains that they both have a symbiotic relationship, so Lee Soo's actions are perplexing. But our girl isn't concerned, she's already dealing with a pesky parasite and won't entertain its logic. So Lee Soo promptly shuts Steer up by slamming her head again. However, before Lee Soo could make contact with her forehead against the floor, she abruptly halted. She realized there was a better way to vanquish the vile parasite. Seeing the gun in front of her, she recalled the words of the state inspector. Lee Soo understood that she needed to make a choice, sacrificing herself to protect all of humanity. Despite Steer's desperate attempts to intervene, Lee Soo remained determined to use the gun to end her own life. Fortunately, Jain appeared just in time to stop her. The moment Lee Soo saw Jain, she opened the valves on her eyes and nose, crying like a child. However, this emotional scene didn't last long as Seo Young's subordinate suddenly appeared, disrupting the moment. He believed Steer was controlling Lee Soo and that her decision to commit suicide was perfect, failing to understand Jain's intentions. For Jain, the manipulation of the opponent was laughable. It was because of such nonsense that Li Su had chosen the path of self-destruction. To awaken her, Jia grabbed Li Su's hair, asserting that her existence posed no threat to anyone, not to the animals in the forest, the fish in the sea, or the birds in the sky. To Jia, the world only consisted of humans, nothing else. The threat to the world wasn't just Li Su but all of humanity, so her death wouldn't matter. For Jia, even if everyone died, it would be fine. Li Su didn't have to bear this burden alone. Hearing this, Xiao Yang's subordinate, more driven by impulse than reason, intended to use the gun for a double kill. However, before he could achieve his goal, his head was separated from his body. After this decisive action, Jian assured Li Su that he would protect her, and she would live. Jian's words woke Li Su up. Just to save her, Jian had killed with a beautiful power she had experienced in the past. Casualties increased rapidly. The peacekeepers were just cannon fodder, rushing into death. Everything was unfolding in a way Li Su didn't want. She screamed, begging Jian to stop the massacre. However, despite Li Su's pitiful appearance, Jian only paused for about 2 seconds before continuing. Yet, the outcome remained unchanged. There was no emotion. Jian coldly severed the head of a government official right in front of Li Su. At this moment, the image of the innocent, kind boy Jian was gone. Instead, before Li Su stood someone who could easily harm anyone who dared to threaten her. For Jian, it was justifiable self-defense. But for Li Su, it was difficult to accept. She wondered who the person in front of her was. Even though the young man claimed to be Jian, Li Su was certain that he was not the friend she once knew. This is not wrong. Jian admitted that if we judged based on the gentle, kind demeanor of the past Jian, then the person Li Su once knew was merely an empty shell, for the individual standing before her now was the true Jian. However, even amidst a world on the brink of destruction, Jian would always protect his friend. At this moment, as the military forces closed in, Jian wanted to take Li Su away, but she refused. Confronting Jian, Li Su asserted her desire to die right there. She understood that Steer posed a grave danger to humanity, so suicide was the decision she deemed right. Jian's sudden change in demeanor terrified Li Su. He had considered severing all of Li Su's limbs to hasten her departure, but ultimately, Jian couldn't bring himself to do it out of fear of causing her pain. Jian's actions left Li Su shaken. However, upon realizing that Jian had no intention of harming her, Li Su began to waver. In response to Jian's questioning, whether she truly desired death, Li Su became increasingly conflicted. Jian revealed to Li Su that he had lived through billions of years, experiencing countless lifetimes, and harbored no regrets. Yet, he had never once contemplated ending his own life. For Jian, every being in existence desires life, and Li Su was no exception. She was merely deceiving herself. Like the image of the child crying in his mother's arms, Li Su also wanted to live. Just as Jian's mother had instructed before parting ways with him, Li Su, regardless of the circumstances and the cost, must survive. At that moment, Jian understood his mother's sentiments from years ago, and so did Li Su. She realized that she still deeply desired to live, albeit somewhat selfishly, and that was her true emotion for them both. Everything seemed like a lie. Until yesterday, Jian's life had been ordinary. Yet today, his hands were stained with fresh blood. As for Li Su, from being an ordinary girl, she had become a threat to all of humanity. However, now both of them were no longer uncertain. Jian and Li Su had found their next path together. Quickly, Jian and Li Su made their way to the research room of the recently deceased department head to search for data on Steer. Unfortunately, they were out of luck as all the documents had been confiscated by the government. Moreover, thanks to Steer's capabilities, Li Su realized that a whopping 129 people were converging on their location to eliminate them both. Regarding the military, the casualty count had surpassed 2,000, so upon spotting their target on the rooftop, they were determined to focus all efforts on eradicating this threat to the nation. However, ants remained just ants. To spare Li Su the anguish, Jian instructed her to close her eyes as he ventured out alone, and that was the end of it. In her heart, Li Su could only think of apologizing because when she opened her eyes again, the death toll had risen by over 1,000. Their fates were predetermined to tread through a sea of blood. Despite the immense difficulty, Li Su and her friend had to continue on the path they had chosen. As for the government, Xiao Yong had arrived at the president's office to request authorization to use missiles to eliminate Jia and Li Su. Xiao Yong tried to persuade the president that the enemy of the nation this time was excessively dangerous, thus the use of missiles was necessary. However, the president was reluctant because the military was still present, and missile use could potentially cause civilian casualties. But perhaps he was mistaken. Xiao Yong didn't come here to obey the president's orders. If he didn't want to approve the missile launch, Xiao Yong would just kill him, similar to how she had demanded the president order Lee Su's execution before. This time, Seo Young also used the excuse of saving everyone. From there, she boldly overthrew the president. When the presidential bodyguards discovered the leader's death, it was already too late. Regardless, Seo Young had long planned the coup d'état. Those aware of today's events wouldn't see the sun again. Quickly, 2 of the president's bodyguards were killed. From the outside, the chief secretary of the president was also brought in. Upon seeing the lifeless body of the president, he was utterly shocked. He didn't know if Seo Young was insane to have shot the head of a country. Nevertheless, Seo Young remained composed, claiming that the president had been infected by steer, hence she had to kill him to save the nation. The chief secretary believed Seo Young's blatant lies could deceive a few people but not the public. Being exposed, Seo Young shamelessly insisted that whether it was the White House or the Prime Minister's office, steer could still spread, let alone the president's residence. Hearing this, the chief secretary, despite knowing Seo Young's blatant lies, tried to remain calm and asked if she was trying to control the country through military force. He argued it wasn't the era for such actions. Seo Young didn't care about him. In any era, leaving a monster who had killed thousands of soldiers outside was ludicrous. Meanwhile, the military couldn't even launch a single missile, making Seo Young sick of hearing about human rights. Human rights only existed in peacetime. Democracy or freedom and equality were outdated concepts to Seo Young. Hearing this, the chief secretary was furious. Countless sacrifices had been made to achieve peace for the country. Yet now, the woman before him wanted to overthrow the government to establish a dictatorship. For the chief secretary, only a madman would commit such heinous crimes. However, in front of him, Seo Young was indeed a madwoman. Despite respecting her opponent's purity, she showed no mercy to anyone who dared oppose her. Thus, another person was marked by her, infected by steer, and mercilessly shot dead. The coup had ended with Seo Young's victory. Yet, upon hearing that Ja-in and Lee Su had escaped, Seo Young agari and rained bullets on the president's corpse. This action made his subordinates sweat profusely. Only after venting all her anger did Seo Young calmly order her subordinates to clean up the battlefield. Meanwhile, on the one hand, she demanded an emergency parliamentary session via the Green Network to formally take control of the country. On the other hand, Seo Young ordered the military to inspect steer-infected areas for political figures to control everything. As for Ja-in and Lee Su, whether using satellite or the military to hunt them down, Seo Young needed to find the enemy as quickly as possible. Once everything was resolved, Seo Young arrogantly settled onto the president's seat. This was what Seo Young had aimed for a long time, knowing a malignant tumor had formed in her mind. Her remaining time in this world wouldn't last long. Seo Young was pleased because before retiring, Ja-in's death would be the historical event that would allow her to die with the title of national hero. Everything was proceeding quickly according to Seo Young's wishes. And this was also the beginning of a new foe for Ja-in. Indeed, this was Ja-in's eternal nemesis, from generation to generation. See you in the next part. Peace.